Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is January 13th, 2024. And let's get to the news happening in Ukraine. And today we're going to Russia first. So, some great news coming out of St. Petersburg because Russia's largest online retailer has a big problem today, St. Petersburg. It's one of its biggest warehouses located in the second largest city in Russia is on fire, and it's a complete loss based on the videos and pictures that we've been seeing. So this is good news because obviously, first of all, this is the biggest retailer, online retailer, the equivalent of, let's say, like an Amazon in North America or the rest of the world. And so this is obviously going to take months to rebuild for Russia, restock, and certainly will have an impact on the average citizen's capability to buy cheap Chinese items. Let's face it, most of these items come from China. And so along with the egg crisis and many other, food crises that Russia's been facing in the last few weeks, and the high inflation, of course, this will only mean that Russia will go back to a Soviet era, economy and those long waiting lines, those notorious long waiting lines that we've been seeing during the Soviet period. And again, speaking of the egg crisis as well, Putin recently mentioned that the reason why there is an egg crisis is that the average income of the average Russian citizen has risen, and thus he's now buying more eggs. I mean, I'm not sure about you, but when I got my first pay increase, I didn't go and spend it on, dozens of eggs. So it's kind of funny, and, it's a BS sort of explanation, which the Russians, of course, will swallow. So this is great news, and it's good to see that, again, it's unknown what exactly caused this fire, but most likely this was a health and safety or lack of health and safety presence in Russian workplaces. So I'm not surprised. These events happen regularly in Russia, but it's good to see that this is going to have a massive impact on the average Russian citizens' capability of buying stuff online and cheap stuff as well from China. So wanted to share these news with you guys. Now, next, let's talk a little bit about the count of Russian tanks. So this is something that we haven't spoken in many months now. So it's good to kind of go back and sort of discuss this topic. So according to the Forbes article, they're mentioning that Russia's lost almost 90% of its tanks in Ukraine. Now, it is important to know that these are the active tanks that Russia reported on. So this doesn't take into account the reserves, which we know Russia has plenty of. They still have most likely a few thousand tanks in reserve. So in the category of active tanks, Russia's lost 90%. So if we look at the numbers, Russia, when they launched the full-scale invasion in 2022, they started with around 3,000 tanks, so 2,987 to be correct, to be more exact. And so in 23 months of heavy fighting, the Russian military has lost at least 2,600 tanks, which independent analysts can confirm based on pictures, videos. So this is proven losses for Russia. So there are 1,725 that were destroyed. So 1,700 that were destroyed, 145 that were damaged, 205 tanks that were abandoned, and 544 that were captured. So this includes the T-55s, the T-62s, the T-72s, T-80s, and the more modern T-90s. It is also noted that if the Russian authorities did not have the ability to make up for their military losses, the number of tanks would be reduced to 368 units. So for now, Russia has sources for replacing tanks, and this is the Uralvagonzavod plant, which produces the new T-90Ms. And as you guys know, I've been repeating myself multiple times in many of my videos saying that Ukraine needs to prioritize destroying Russian factories in Russia. And the Uralvagonzavod is one of the most important, I think, factories that Ukraine, if they would be able to destroy it, that would be in the top 5 factories that Ukraine needs to destroy. This is where Russia is still capable of producing a few dozen tanks per month, including the T-90Ms, because of this massive tank plant that they have. And they also have other tank plants and enterprise that repair older tanks. So this is priority number 1 for Ukraine, in my opinion. And speaking of the T-90Ms, I just want to also note there is an excellent video that was released by the Ukrainian forces out of Stepove, and I'm going to share just kind of the map. the frontline map of Stepove. So again, this is in Avdiivka, and this was very interesting because essentially this is the town of Stepove here, and there was a tank battle between the Ukrainian Bradleys and a T-90M. So you can see that, of course, unfortunately, the Russians have made some advances. So they have entered parts of the village of Stepove, which is, was less than 500 people before the war. So it's a very small town. But what was interesting to see is that the Ukrainians managed to destroy this T-90M, so the most modern Russian tank, with the M2 Bradley. And it shows the effectiveness of the Bushmaster 25mm cannon. Now, to the credit of the T-90M, it managed to take a lot of hits, direct hits by the Bushmaster cannon, and it was still mobile at the end, but it was non-functional, the turret was spinning, it was a loss. But the T-90M is definitely a more robust and better protected tank compared to the other ones, but it indicates that the Bradleys can do damage on even these super modern Russian tanks. So this is why I've been saying that Ukraine absolutely needs to get more of these Bradleys that are probably sitting in massive scrapyards in the United States that could be used right now by the Ukrainians to destroy more Russian armor. And it's very impressive, the fact that I think the Bradley can be credited partly for the defense of Avdiivka, for this very long, effective defense that the Ukrainians have managed to set up in Avdiivka, because without them, I think that Avdiivka probably would have been encircled by now with the massive infantry and armored attacks that the Russians have been doing the last few months in Avdiivka alone. So all that to say that the Bradleys, Ukraine needs more of them, and if the United States can send at least 200, 300 of them in the next few months, that would be of great help for the Ukrainians, especially in the area of Avdiivka, where there's a lot of urban fighting, not only in Stepove, but in the center now of Avdiivka and also in the southern part of Avdiivka. So let's hope those Bradleys come. Now, let's go back to the main slides. And now I want to talk, my last slide is going to be about the White House throwing support behind seizing frozen Russian assets. So you can see that Joe Biden's administration is backing legislation that would let it sees some of $300 billion worth of Russian assets to pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So this is excellent news. And again, I hope that this is going to get approved. The Russians are making their money outside of Russia, so it's only fair for these assets to be seized to help rebuild Ukraine once this war is over. And I think if this happens, which I really am hopeful it will, then it will set the stage as well for Europe to seize another $200 billion of frozen Russian assets in the EU. So together with this $500 billion that could be potentially seized and given to Ukraine, this would pay mostly for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Now the World Bank has estimated that this would be right now the tab is sitting around $411 billion for Ukraine to rebuild all of its infrastructure. And of course, I think it's even more than that at this point. It's not only just the infrastructure, but it's also the human loss and everything else that you lose through this devastating war. So again, what I have to say is that this is an excellent start, but let's hope that this is going to actually happen in this year, in 2024, which obviously would piss off the Russians 100%. Now, in some other kind of smaller news, so basically Rishi Sunak from the United Kingdom came yesterday to Kyiv and announced the commitment by the UK to continue providing support to Ukraine, and they pledged $2.5 billion worth of military assistance for this year, which is excellent news. They've mentioned that there's going to be a large delivery of drones, long-range missiles, which probably will be the Storm Shadows, air defense systems, and also artillery shells that will be expected for April to Ukraine. So this is excellent. That was worth about 200 billion pounds. That is expected in terms of aid in April. However, as much as I'm super thankful, and again, the British people and the United Kingdom has really been one of the top Ukrainian supporters, no matter which government got elected, and it's been very tumultuous for the last few years in Britain with, the change of leaderships, but there's always been a commitment to helping Ukraine. And that's what I would like to see, let's say in the United States or other countries, where as soon as a new government is elected, you're not worried that they somehow can change their position in terms of, helping Ukraine or not, which is one of my biggest worries with the US elections in 2024, because I think I'm 100% sure that Trump will probably back away from supporting Ukraine and will force Ukraine to deal with Russia, which will not be advantageous to Ukraine. So thankfully, Britain is not like that. And Rishi Sunak, again, is showing Britain's commitment to helping Ukraine militarily, financially, and in many other ways, and with also humanitarian aid. But as I've said previously, really, I hope that this year Ukraine at least gets to begin having talks for NATO accession. Ukraine needs to be part of NATO. If realistically speaking, in the short term, Ukraine most likely will not be able to regain all of its lost territory from Russia. So at the very least, with Ukraine knowing that it is part of NATO, it would be in a much better position, a much stronger position to have negotiations with Russia, because it's very likely that this will happen. Now, is it going to happen in 2024? Maybe not. 2025, maybe it's going to be in the long term, but this will put Ukraine in a much stronger position. So although all these, foreign military packages being given to Ukraine by either Germany, the UK, France, the United States, there needs to be eventually talks and an official process for Ukraine to become part of NATO. And lastly, I just want to talk about Estonia. So this is another news. Estonia is considering, essentially, let's zoom out to go to Estonia, is considering to mine its border with Russia, which I fully support. Again, what is really helping Estonia is that most of its border with Russia is divided by 2 lakes. So it doesn't have to really worry about mining this lake, and more about mining the southern tip of the border with Russia and the northern tip. So I fully support that. Again, we've seen that mining borders or front lines has been extremely effective. The Russians have done it, and it's been very effective for the defense of the south last year during the Ukraine counteroffensive. So this would definitely be a good deterrent, because we've heard rumors that Russia potentially in the next few years could try to invade the Baltics. It's entirely possible, right? Especially if they force some sort of peace deal into Ukraine, and then they have time to rearm and potentially start another attacks elsewhere. So I fully support this decision, and I think every Baltic country right now should be considering to do this, because again, there's also the question mark on NATO. Is NATO really committed enough to actually, if Russia was to invade, let's say Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, would they actually go all in and commit to defending their members? It's a question mark, right? We've seen Russian missiles fly through a few weeks ago in Poland, or some Russian drones hit Romania, which are tests, right? Putin is testing NATO right now. This is just a little, how much more can I get away with type of test. So, this is a huge question mark. So this is why I think Estonia is considering this as well, because it doesn't know how committed, the NATO partners will be. And especially if Trump gets elected in 2024, he said multiple times that he's considering to completely withdraw from NATO and stop the support of NATO. So, and let's face it, NATO is mainly supported right now by the United States. So there's a lot of question marks for this year and 2025. So overall, this is the situation for today. I hope you guys enjoyed my little news update and map update as well. Let me know what you guys think about any of the topics I covered today. A huge thank you for support. Subscribe to my channel, like my video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!